Good morning, everyone. Hello. Welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm Tim Raleigh. I'm President and Vice Chancellor of this fine institution, and I'd like to acknowledge that Mount Royal University is located in the traditional territories of the Niitsitapi, Blackfoot, and the people of Treaty 7 in southern Alberta. Thank you all for taking the time to be here this morning for our community town hall meeting. I'll give you a brief outline of what we'll be doing. Before I do that, I want to acknowledge the folks who are joining us online, streaming. Welcome. I'd also like to acknowledge the media in the room. And what I'd like to do is, I think, acknowledge that this has been a difficult week at the university. Over the past week, we have said goodbye to 10 of our colleagues. They have left behind people who are hurting. And a number of people have called me to express concern, and I truly empathize with those of you who are hurting and our colleagues who are no longer employed at the university. Although I've only been at the university a brief period of time, I too had formed connections with these people, and I have to assure you this was one of the most difficult decisions of my career. I also want to acknowledge that for those of you left behind picking up the work, that this is a difficult transition during a time where you're already burdened by these changes. I've been asked why we haven't shared a list of names of those people who have left the organization broadly. We did share the name of the Vice President of Student Affairs and Campus Life. Steve's role was an important role and wanted to let you know about his departure. For the others, we wanted to approach this in a manner that was respectful, and your VPs will inform you, and your direct supervisors will do their best to let you know who the key internal and external stakeholders who need to know about these changes are, and understanding that these transitions take a bit of time, so I would ask for your patience. I also want to acknowledge that these are times of uncertainty. More than anything, I think people want answers about their jobs and the jobs in your area and how the work might change or get done. I don't have those answers for you today, but I hope that the information that we do have to share with you will be helpful. I'm going to review some of the information that I've previously communicated to the campus community through emails, but we will also allow time for questions and answers today. I'll try to address some of the key themes that have been posed at our budget question email. And certainly we, after this event, will continue to be responsive and will update the Q&A based on both the questions that are asked today as well as whatever is emailed as we go forward. So I'm going to give a bit of an outline of our situation, and then I'm going to ask our vice presidents, Leslie, Annalise, and Paul, to go into a bit more detail about their divisions. Again, we'll close with Q&As from the campus community, and I'll make myself available after this event for media. So, let's get going. I must say that being in this beautiful Bella Concert Hall to discuss budget is not what I had anticipated this fine facility would be used for, but it is wonderful that all of you are here. And definitely for the question and answer period, I want to acknowledge the configuration in the room, which means that we might not always be able to get roving mics to you. So definitely the person up here will try to repeat the question so that you can all hear it, and for those who are joining us on live stream. So, pardon me if I state some of the obvious, but I want to make sure that we are on the same page. As you know, this spring, the provincial election occurred, and a government was elected on a platform of fiscal austerity. And we understand that and are working with government to the best of our ability. The approach was reflected in the McKinnon report, which gave a framework for the future, followed by the October budget, where we were informed of both in-year budget cuts as well as what to anticipate for the 3 subsequent years. So I want to talk a little bit about the current budget gap, and while I have outlined that in broad terms previously, I do want to make sure that we are all understanding the situation. You can see on this slide how we generate money. The numbers in the pie chart are from the budget that was approved last May by our Board of Governors. Tuition and fees have stayed the same, and there has been a freeze on tuition during the past 5 years. There is some good news insofar as our revenue generation. There appears to have been some improvement, and we're doing well. And Annalise Van Ham will speak a little bit more about that. The Campus Alberta grant is about $100 million of the $120 million that we receive. The small pie chart shows the $2.1 million cut to our grant. That's in-year cut. We appreciate the government used differentiated cuts. So Mount Royal received a 1.3% cut in year, which was quite favorable in compared to some of our sister institutions. I'm grateful to the government for recognizing our limited financial capacity to deal with the in-year cut, and I think it was a very brave decision on their part. The other cut was to our infrastructure maintenance program. That cut was across the sector, and we're told that that will restart next year. So overall, the gap we need to close this year is around $5.7 million on a $240 million operating budget. The other side of the ledger. Here are our expenses. As you can see, 70% of our expenses are in the form of salaries and benefits. This is, of course, directly related to the rationale for position elimination. And as I indicated, and in case I'll reiterate it, this week we abolished 10 filled positions, and we are also in the process of eliminating 15 more vacant positions. As my message said on Tuesday, there will be no more positions eliminated in 2019. Unfortunately, we will likely need to cut more positions in 2020. And we don't know which ones, and we don't know the exact timing, but I want to be honest with you about that. Of course, there are other ways that we can reduce costs. They include only creating positions when absolutely necessary, looking at ways of doing our work differently, reducing administration costs and discretionary expenses across the institution, and only doing building repairs as necessary or directly related to revenue generation. And finally, trying to increase in terms of fundraising. The government has also focused on red tape reduction. They themselves have asked Albertans to provide information where we think that there are opportunities for red tape reductions, and of course Mount Royal is looking inwards at our own red tape reduction. Some of our processes, while very well-intentioned, are overly burdensome, and they create work. We need to see how we can get work done more efficiently, and we also need to critically look at how we value some of the work and stop doing what we can stop doing. As well, there are some other changes in our governance because we moved from Part 1 of the Post-Secondary Learning Act. We created a new body called Statutory Dean's Council. That council includes all of the President's Executive Committee and the former Dean's Council, which is now called Provost Council. And the membership of that Statutory Dean's Council overlaps significantly with some of the existing committees in the institution. In particular, I'll note for you the Resource Advisory Group largely is the members of Statutory Dean's Council. So those functions will be largely transferred to Dean's Council. I want to be abundantly clear that as we close this gap, that everything is on the table. We have an opportunity to examine how we do things and how we can make some positive changes, but we have to look at everything. I'd like to turn now to the future years. Government has been very clear that they want us to rely on less on grants. They have signaled to expect a 5% increase, a 5% cut, I wish, 5% increase, a 5% cut to the Campus Alberta grant starting next year and for 3 years. So this is roughly for us, it works out coincidentally to roughly $5 million a year. Government has also lifted the freeze on tuition, allowing up to a 7% increase for each of the next 3 years. We, of course, have to go through our consultation process to determine how much or if we increase tuition, but I think it's safe to say that tuition will go up. If I may pause here for just a moment for a few comments and say that it is not possible for us to balance our budget on increased tuition, that we need to be very mindful of the fact that we had already budgeted 2% inflationary costs for tuition for the next few years, And formerly, when tuition was frozen, in most years, we received a certain amount of added Campus Alberta grant from the former government to make up for the fact there was a freeze, and we've lost that. So we've also been told, although we have not seen it in any formally articulated, that the 7% yearly would be treated in the same manner as the previous 2% allowance, which would allow for in-year tuition increases, but you couldn't carry over any unused portion to subsequent years. The government has pointed out that Alberta has the lowest average tuition in Canada, outside of Quebec, which has, as a Quebecer born, a completely different approach to most things, including tuition. And I believe there are ways that if we do increase tuition, that we could increase bursaries to those students who are most affected by tuition increase. But again, I want to emphasize that no decision has been made about tuition increase, and we are committed to the tuition consultation, and tuition levels and the university budget are the authority and the decision of our Board of Governors. Having spent some time with government, I am optimistic about a new funding formula, something that would be based on outcomes. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the outcomes that we have and the McKinnon report and how those were characterized. So the McKinnon report in particular, although it compared across the country, there was a good deal of focus in the post-secondary sector on British Columbia and Ontario. Now, I'm not personally 100% sure how these measures were calculated, but I can say that with respect to MRU and its performance, they are stronger than the Alberta average, and the percentage we get in grants from the province is lower than the Alberta average, as well as the BC average. The other area is completion rates, and here, a higher percentage of MRU students complete their studies over 7 years compared to the Alberta average. So those are very good outcomes, and although they're good, of course we want to strive to do even better. I'd like to shift gears somewhat here and remember why we come to work. Graduate outcomes are what we and the government and employers care about. And I won't read through the entire table, but I'll say again, MRU's performance is strong. Experiential learning is a key part of MRU and our undergraduate experience, and it's something that benefits everyone. Our students are extremely satisfied, and demand for a Mount Royal education continues to rise. There are not enough seats in Alberta, and particularly in Calgary, which is a call for us as a university to do our best to fulfill our mission of educating Albertans. And certainly, as I look around the room, I can see some of you through the lights, I'd like to thank you for your contributions to allowing these outcomes to be so strong. And I would note that not everyone talks about some of these outcomes, and I think we need to remember that there are financial metrics and a number of other important outcomes for us. So the challenge in front of us is how do we maintain or improve and have positive momentum with a slightly leaner structure. In particular, the merger this week of student affairs and campus life into the provost's portfolio, while very difficult personally, was an opportunity I saw to do this. With that transition, I'll give the floor to Leslie Brown, our provost and vice president academic, to speak more about the changes in the academic affairs portfolio. Dr. Brown.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for being here. I'll start off by picking up where Tim left off, and I'll start with the merge of SACL into academic affairs. Before I talk about that, though, I would like to acknowledge the leadership of my former colleague, Steve Fitterer, and the work that he's done in bringing Mount Royal University forward as a student-centered institution. The merge of SACL into academic affairs will allow us to more seamlessly align the supports that we provide for students with their educational experience. And that will be our driving goal as we move forward through the transition period and into the coming years. When we merged these portfolios, we realized that there was some overlap in position duties and there was some redundancy. And in addition to the executive position, we have also eliminated 2 management positions and 3 staff exempt positions. In academic affairs, there will be some other restructures as well that we're currently implementing. The first is that the portfolio of research will be merged into the AVP academic. So the position of AVP research will not be filled. The merging of the portfolio of research into academic under the title of Vice Provost and AVP academic is a nod to who we are as an institution. It's a confirmation of our commitment and our value to bring the research that we do and to translate that into the teaching that we do in the classroom. Additionally, we will also be merging the Institute for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning under the purview of the Academic Development Center. And in the same way, what we're doing is we are closing the gap between research and teaching and upholding our pride in research-informed teaching. Our ability to generate new knowledge and translate that new knowledge into our classroom is something that gets me incredibly excited. When we look at and we consider budget scenarios in academic affairs, we have to look at our academic schedule. And when we're making decisions about our academic schedule, first and foremost, we have to consider our students, and we have to be guided by principles and values that are going to enhance rather than inhibit or impede the educational journey of the students who choose to come to our university. The guiding principles that have influenced and have directed our decisions and will continue to influence and direct our decisions are student retention and timely degree completion. We want students to stay here. We don't want them to go somewhere else. And we want them to walk across our stage at graduation. And we want them to carry forward their pride about our institution as they continue on in their careers and their future lives. I'd like to recognize the work of chairs who have worked closely with faculty members and deans in coming up with some truly innovative suggestions and solutions and creative ways forward as we think about how we can deliver our academic schedule in a more austere way. Some suggestions that have come forward include increasing the number of course offerings that we provide in the spring, expanding our academic schedule into the evening, and diversifying our teaching practice to embrace more fulsomely online and blending learning opportunities. And again, these are all outcomes that are going to benefit our students. Now, when we think about the academic schedule and we think about the question of budget, we also have to think about class size. And I can guarantee you there's discussions about class size that have been happening. When we make decisions about class size, we have to recognize that increasing class size or the size of a class influences the accessibility to an education for students. And when we make a decision about class size, we base that decision on a number of values and principles. First and foremost, and above all else, we think about who we are. We think about our reputation, our brand, and our value add. We are an institution that takes tremendous pride in having smaller class sizes. We know that students choose Mount Royal University because of our capacity to offer smaller class sizes. We're not going to compromise that. But it's time for us to be more flexible in that. And when we inform our decisions about the size of a class, we also look at other variables, such as our architecture. What's our physical capacity and our ability to actually have the space to offer us a larger class? What's the demand for the class? And lastly, what's the type of teaching practice that's being used to deliver the content of that class? What's a faculty member's pedagogy? And we know that some classes are not conducive to increases in size, but we also know that some classes are conducive to increasing their size. And it's time for us to think creatively and innovatively to think about the way that we can best serve our students in this time of budget challenge. So as we look to the future, we'll begin by looking at our physical spaces, and we'll begin to explore our architecture and our space, our room size, to see if there's ways that we can be more flexible, not just in the number of students within the class, but in the ways and the modalities in which we are touching those students in the class when they are learning. I'll end by some longer-term commitments as we navigate academic fairs through through these times. Tim has alluded to our enrollment profile and our enrollment growth. I'm very proud to be a provost at an institution that's in great demand. We have the luxury of being a first-choice institution for students in the Calgary region. And in fact, our enrollments have grown over 10% in the last 3 years. That's unprecedented. That's impressive and something for all of us to be proud of. Students want to come here, and parents want to send their children here. We have an aspirational goal of increasing our full load equivalent to 10,700 in 2021, and we'll continue to reach towards that goal. We won't take our foot off the gas, but what we also recognize is that we have great opportunity to diversify our enrollment profile. And what we can do is we can make more spaces for international students. We have an aspirational target right now of 5% by 2025, and we're thinking that maybe we could do a little bit better, maybe open that up, maybe think about 10% by 2025. We will continue to seize our opportunities for revenue generation in continuing education. We've worked very hard in this portfolio to allow that unit to operate in an area of profit margin. And over the past year, we have situated and we have positioned that unit to be ready to respond to the Calgary economy, to market demand, and to industry demand, and we'll continue to move forward in that regard. Likewise, we'll continue to ensure that we have academic programs available so that students will continue to want to come to Mount Royal University. I'm committed to the vitality of this institution, and I'm committed to ensuring that our academic programs are fresh and that they're relevant. So we will also be moving forward with our commitment to develop new degree majors and to be innovative and creative in the degree majors that we're offering. And lastly, because it's absolutely necessary, we will continue to invest in the heart of this institution. We will continue to invest in faculty and the hiring of new faculty through the Possibilities Fund. Thank you. I'd like to invite Annelies van Hamme.
Good morning. And along with Tim and my VP colleagues, I thank you as well for taking the time to come and listen and understand more about what we're facing and how we propose the best way to navigate the challenges ahead. So in finance and administration, we've had a strategic focus over the last 18 months of service, excellence, and success. We're focused on our team and the pride in our team in taking the support services they deliver very seriously in support of our university and our students. I've made some difficult decisions along with my colleagues this past week, and I wish to acknowledge the hard work of my former AVP of Business Retail Services, Aaron LeBlanc, in advancing the activities of business retail services, and have leaned, as Leslie had mentioned as well, on vacant positions and other openings to help to balance our budget going forward. These cost reductions, while focused on, are really focusing on frontline services and ensuring we maintain current and reliable necessary supports for the programs and services across the institution. We'll be continuing with the budget model advancement and finalizing that. We've used it already to inform going forward thus far, and see the need to continue to have the best information and data available to inform future decisions and budget allocations or resource allocations. As Tim mentioned, our processes across many areas in the institution are somewhat dated, and we're really focusing now on a business process reengineering. We started with the Banner 9 project to provide us additional and simplified functionality, and we're continuing with the momentum we started there to ensure that our processes are current, that they have, that they support a current learning environment, but also a current work environment for our employees and a compelling place for people to come and spend their day and efforts with Mount Royal. So the focus on process design and red tape reduction is happening across all of the departments in my division. When we think about our discussion with government, one of the things we've been looking at also is our fiscal year and the extra burden that we have in having to reconcile a fiscal year that's not aligned with government. So that's amongst the things that we're talking about changing that would simplify our reporting demand. Internally, as I said, we'll continue with our momentum on Banner 9, modernizing our processes, increasing electronic workflows, and ensuring we have the right level of controls within our process, controls that are risk-informed, not simply for the sake of control. I want to touch briefly on capital. Tim talked about the infrastructure maintenance program, and as noted in his email earlier this week, what we're left with, we didn't receive that funding, and much of that activity happens in the beginning of the fiscal year and our multi-year expansive projects. So at this point on the infrastructure maintenance program, it'll be only emergency response to issues that arise. That said, we will continue, of course, to carry out necessary routine upkeep of these great facilities and ensure that our preventative maintenance program is current as to the best of our abilities financially and extends the life of these facilities. And I think that's a principle that's consistent with what was in the Macmillan report, focusing on the best use and maintenance of existing facilities rather than new build. Our capital priorities that we've identified for the province over the past 3 years is for the refurbishment or the renovation of the old conservatory spaces as well as the old library, and a refresh of our main corridors along the main street. While we were disappointed that that was not included in the provincial budget earlier in October, we understand in that the government only funded capital projects that were already underway to ensure completion of those initiatives. There was no new funding initiatives that were started. Everyone that Paul Rossman, our VP of University Advancement, and his team have toured through those facilities absolutely agree it is the right thing for us to repurpose and redeploy those good opportunities, and we remain hopeful in our future ability to continue with that project. In a certain phase, we're still continuing to look at different approaches and funding sources. I'll touch also on the net revenue generation, and as Leslie commented on the great work that's being done in continuing education, the McKinnon report spelled out a very clear directive, and also the government has noted the need for institutions to become more self-reliant in terms of our revenue sources. Internally, we're focused on identifying the best services and commercial opportunities to serve our campus and our growing surrounding community. We are next door to Canada Lands, where there is development plans that are several years out, but nonetheless will introduce up to 15,000 residents right next door to the university and provide us with a great and growing neighborhood of activity. Inside Mount Royal now, we've seen tremendous growth in net revenue, not just revenue, but net revenue due to diligence and innovative approaches. Event and theater services has seen its greatest year so far and tremendous access and use of these great facilities for rentals and for conferences. Food service review is just being completed, and we'll be taking a look at how best to serve the needs of our community and again perform financially for the institution. And there's additional opportunities that are built into the new one-card technology that we'll continue to explore. This effort has to continue, and it must be well coordinated across the institution to ensure the quality of services and efficient net returns. As well, we're developing a long-term comprehensive plan for technology, furniture and equipment, and renovation renewals. Leslie spoke to the classroom flexibility and having some larger spaces. That requires our internal investment. We need to be sure we have enabling technology, refresh of systems and taking advantage of new functionality for our learning environment, streamlined administrative processes, and commercial and retail activities. And as an example for furniture and equipment, I think we make the best use of what we have in our spaces. I'm not sure how old my desk is, but I'm not quite catching, or it's not quite catching up to me, but we're neck and neck. What we did this year is we invested in additional seating and desks to accommodate our growing exam cohorts. And in doing that, we repurposed furniture that was in classrooms, and we'll put the new furnishings into the classrooms that were vacated by that furniture, and we'll be able to reduce the amount of schlep of furniture across the institution, be more efficient that way, and accommodate the growing exam groups. Just as an example of the necessary funding that we have, this type of renewal and refresh investment comes out of our reserve and capital budgets, and so we have to plan in the long term for what that capacity need is. Finally, I'll just note that while the past week has presented very, very difficult decisions, Human Resources continues to focus and development of an institutional talent management framework. This includes benefit redesign, as you've seen, employer recognition program, which will be rolled out very shortly, redesign of our performance management processes, learning and development, and of course, health and safety. And I can assure you that myself, my whole of my team, will continue to do every day everything we can to support our academic mission. I'll invite Paul Rossman up for his divisional update.
Thank you, Annalise, and good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Rossman, Vice President, University Advancement, and I have only one slide today that I'll speak to, and then we'll invite Tim back to wrap things up and invite some questions. So for those of you who aren't totally familiar with the University Advancement Division, it includes marketing and communications, it includes fundraising through the MRU Foundation, includes alumni relations and government relations. It's the smallest division at Mount Royal by far. A small division, but a mighty one, I like to think. And that's due to the impact that we can have and we are having in terms of securing additional resources for Mount Royal. Last year, for example, in the area of fundraising, we raised $18 million. And what that translates into is that for every dollar that we invest in expenses to support that fundraising operation, we raised $7.94 in terms of donations. So it's a great return on investment. As we've been rebuilding our alumni relations programs and our fundraising capacity in recent years, we're trying very hard to ensure that we don't disrupt that positive momentum as we're faced with our current fiscal environment. Fundraising for student awards is our top fundraising priority, and I think now it becomes all the more important. Over the last 5 years, we've increased our endowment to support student awards from $31.5 million to $40 million. So significant increase, and that endowment generates earnings that provide over $1.4 million a year to support student awards. And that's a guaranteed investment or a guaranteed cash flow every year in perpetuity to support student awards. The McKinnon report spoke specifically about the need to grow alternative revenue sources. outside of tuition and government grants. And so it's important that we continue to increase our fundraising capacity and the strong community profile that supports our alumni relations and that fundraising work. This week, the University Advancement Division said goodbye to a government relations advisor. Government relations, of course, remains a critical function for us. I can assure you that Tim and I are having regular meetings with folks at the Ministry of Advanced Education and with other government stakeholders. And that important work will certainly continue. So thank you very much, and I'll invite Tim back.
I think I'm okay. I think that's it, right? There we go. Well, I really do believe that Mount Royal has a strong future as the best undergraduate university in Canada. We are and we will continue to be student-focused and outcome-driven. This must continue, but we have to do it with a slightly leaner structure. It's also the perfect time for us to redo and revisit our strategic plan, focusing on what is really core and important to us. So yes, we are facing some challenges, difficult decisions, and as a somewhat lapsed psychologist, I have to acknowledge that it is normal for us to feel anxious and to feel the effects of the stress. All I can tell each of you is to try to stay focused on your work, look at efficiencies and innovation, stay positive, keep informed, which clearly you're doing, and remember to look after yourself and, if possible, others around you. In terms of, I would be remiss if I didn't express a few thanks, not necessarily for this event, although thank you for everyone who helped organize this event. As I look around the room, as I was listening to my vice presidential colleagues speak, I was watching all of you, recognizing where you come from in the institution and how you are processing this information. I am so grateful for the welcome I received some almost 7 months ago to MRU. Clearly, I'm not new anymore. I'm in the thick of it in terms of what's going on, but I remain grateful. I'm grateful for the support of our governing structures, the General Faculties Council, and our Board of Governors. And I see some of our board members and General Faculties Council counselors here today. Thank you for being here. I look to our students. Although this is largely an employee town hall, we have some representative here from students, and I'm so grateful to the students who are here and to SAMRU. They have been very positive partners, very reasonable, rational, and we have a wonderful working relationship with them, and it's something I would like to preserve. So thank you, SAMRU. Staff. You know, I've been on both sides of this aisle, staff and faculty. Staff, you're awesome. You're a vital part of this institution, and you make it possible for us to achieve our mission and vision. And faculty, your work, you are the heart of this institution. The amount of contact that you have with our students, you change lives, and this is what we must preserve. I also look around the room and I see some chairs. I see our amazing deans. I see associate vice presidents, vice provosts, other members of the President's Executive Committee. This has been a bit of a rough go, and I want to thank you for your continued work to help preserve our future. I'm so grateful to be at Mount Royal University. I'm so proud to work and serve on your behalf. I'm so committed to responsible leadership during difficult times, and I'm dedicated to our future. Mount Royal has been here for 110 years, and it will be here in 110 more years. So with that in mind, we'll stop talking up here a little bit, and we'll open up the floor to questions from members of the campus community. As I indicated, I'll make myself available afterwards for media. In order to allow for questions to be passed around, we'll start with one question per person until we've exhausted that. We don't have microphones set up here. The acoustics in the wonderful Bella Concert Hall will allow us probably to hear you. And what we'll do is we'll repeat the question for the benefit of those joining us on live stream. If you have a particularly long question, which I don't encourage, but if you happen to have a very long question, we can see if we can pass down one of the handheld mics to you on that. So, if I may, why don't we just start and see who the bold, intrepid person is who would like to start us off. Yes, back there.
First and foremost, I just want to say thank you very much for being so forthcoming and transparent with all of our communications to us. It's very much appreciated, even though it may not be the greatest of news at times. Thank you for at least sharing where we're sitting.
Thank you.
I am also wearing the hat of Director at Large for our MRSA, our Staff Association. I have been at Mount Royal for over 30 years. I truly bleed blue. I've been very fortunate and honored to be a part of this institution. I'm very concerned about a certain matter that I just want to bring it up as a point of conversation and maybe move forward with reconsideration on how we manage something, which is the abolishments. And I know that this is not something we can avoid. We understand that this is tough times and this is going to happen. My plea is more around how we manage that and how we are treating our staff that we are walking out of here. And I'm asking for some consideration along the human element of this. They're called into a room, they're made to turn in keys, they're asked to leave, usually by a back door. They're not given an opportunity to go back to their offices, gather their stuff, talk to their staff, and potentially debrief around what's going on. I had someone in my office the other day that had a meeting, came from another campus to meet with somebody here, only to find out that position had been abolished and that meeting wasn't going to happen. So my question is, how are we managing those people that were just walking out of here? Are they not, who's watching their calendar for those important appointments? Who is taking the reins for what they're doing? I have binders and file folders of stuff that if I was walked out, nobody would know where to find that stuff. So why are we not allowing our employees an opportunity to go back to their offices with their heads held with some dignity, to gather their belongings, to say goodbye to their colleagues, to potentially pass off what they've worked so hard for, and walk out of here with some pride and dignity? I would hate to think after 30 years that I wasn't given that opportunity. We're not smashing glasses and burning flags on the way out. We're good people. We've been here that long. So just a question and consideration to maybe managing that piece a little differently.
I don't know that I can do the question justice to repeat it in its entirety to those watching on live stream, but essentially, as I understand it, the question, from a member of staff who also serves on the Staff Association, was around the manner in which Mount Royal has done the abolishments, and particularly a plea for how their colleagues have been treated, and to consider the human element in terms of dismissing staff, and in particularly the manner in which immediately they are treated upon hearing the news that their position has been abolished. There are no easy answers to these kinds of questions. I will attempt to share with you my own perspective, recognizing it is my own perspective. I guess what I would start by saying there is no easy way to do this, that the manner in which the university would approach the abolishment of a position it probably differs depending on the particular situation. And here I would point out the timeliness or our ability to react in a timely manner. And I would point out that we weren't abolishing one position or two positions. Unfortunately, we were abolishing many positions. My own perspective is, although it can be perceived otherwise, that in terms of the manner in which the information and the news was delivered to the people was done in as empathetic and professional a manner as could be done, that those people were provided support at the time that they were informed that their positions were eliminated. And the reality after sadly almost 30 years in the system, is that in terms of how people and individuals react to the news that their position has been abolished is not a certainty. I take the point, and I'm particularly mindful of the comment that that you and people like you bleed blue and have demonstrated decades of loyalty to the institution. But I also am very mindful of people and their emotions and their reaction at the time that they are told that news, and trying to balance compassion for them, what people have told us themselves, some of whom want to quietly leave, and as well recognizing that their reactions may have an impact on those around them. Now, that might sound like a big assumption. My hope is that given the connections that individuals have with their colleagues, that there is communication that transpires after they are left. The organization, the institution is providing support. In terms of abolishments that I myself have had to do, trying to deliver it in the most humane manner. Understanding that at that time that news is delivered, that people's capacity to engage in a conversation is somewhat limited. And I've certainly made a commitment in the abolishments I've done to invite people when they can, if they wish, to reconnect afterwards, to have a conversation, to help gain understanding, and to support them as they try to find their way forward with their career. So I take the plea, and certainly I think we'll reflect on it, but try to balance off and recognize that there are many considerations in the broad scheme here. Do we have another question? Shayla.
Hello everyone, I'm Shayla, President of the Student Association of Mount Royal University. Thank you for this presentation today. I really appreciate the comments about, I don't know who I should look at. I really appreciate the comments. Why am I staying off the top? I appreciate the comments around the tuition piece and how we shouldn't be balancing the budget on the backs of students. I think that's really important. It's a really important sentiment. I think there's this idea that students have a lot of money. That's not true. I can say that. If you want to see my credit card statements and loans, you're really welcome. But on a serious matter, one thing of concern that's come up that we're hearing from other institutions is the increase of international tuition and how some institutions are utilizing international tuition in order to more balance that budget. I'm wondering what the consideration will be around international student tuition, especially because international students at the University of Alberta, for example, 40% of the users of the campus food bank there are international students. So just wondering about that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So the question had to do with a comment and then a question. I'll reiterate the comment on your behalf in the name of Positive Relationships with SAMRU, and that is to say that the president of the Student Association indicated that tuition and our budget cannot be balanced on the backs of students, to quote, and that students don't necessarily have a lot of money, understood. The specific question was in terms of the increase or possible increase on international tuition based on information from other institutions and what Mount Royal was thinking with respect to international student tuition. So international student activity is an area for me that I've worked in for quite a while. I guess the short answer to you, Shayla, is that there is no plan. Well, I've said everything's on the table. There is no plan for large increases to international student tuition. I think that in the same manner that the government and the McKinnon report are looking at other jurisdictions to figure out what we're charging and how that fares by comparison, international tuition is actually quite an interesting thing. We have to look not only at the institutions around us, but we actually have to look worldwide because people from around the world are making choices about where they're going to go to school. If they choose to come to Canada, they need to look at our tuition. So it's not what's the tuition down the street at a college or another university in Alberta. It's also what are they charging in British Columbia, what are they charging in Ontario, what are they charging in Australia. My assessment with a just a kind of a wild preliminary look at our international student tuition, I don't see capacity for us to make great change to our international tuition levels. That being said, it is a dynamic market, and it's something that we would have to look at each year. Another question. Okay, sorry, I see a hand here. Sorry, the lights are a bit tricky. Thank you. Sorry, my hand can't go as fast as people can speak. So our colleague from Health and Phys Ed asked about entrepreneurial approach and specifically what that means to us in terms of us as leaders, and what does that mean for faculty and staff who are around the institution. So thank you so much for that question, because I believe it's a question I can turn over to some of my colleagues, and that way I can grab a sip of water. But Annalise, you look like you'd like to say something, and maybe Leslie would actually like to comment as well on this.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for the question. And it is clearly indicated, as I noted in my comments, the expectation of the province, and as reflected in the McKinnon report, that we increase our self-reliance in our commercial activity. I want to be clear: there's no quick light switches on this. Were it so, that would have been triggered some time ago. That said, and also we don't have large parcels of unused land to develop land trusts. Some institutions are fortunate that way. That's not Mount Royal's experience, and that's we're happy for what we have. I think that a coordinated institutional approach to look at the best opportunities is what we need. As I mentioned, we have a growing community right next door with the developments actually around the campus in many ways. Canada Lands, ATCO, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Taza developments happening there. And we are taking a deliberate look at how that changes this quadrant and this area that we experience geographically, and how that might change and give us opportunities for the services and the traffic that we have on campus, the services that we provide to our own internal community at Mount Royal, but then how might we also better invite and engage with the community beyond us. So there's been some really great work that's been done there already, meeting with our neighbors, working to enhance the things that we're providing in Mount Royal Kids, for instance, MRU Kids. We saw a very strong performance last year. This will only grow. And so I think we're not going to either bake sale our way out of this. We have to be really mindful of net revenue and material effective initiatives, and we need to work across the institution to collaborate and make sure that we are seen as coordinated in a place where people want to bring their families for activities. There are opportunities.
Leslie, did you want to add on to that?
Thanks. Am I live?
You're live. You're live and in person.
Christy, thanks so much for the question. I think, from my perspective, what that request means in academic affairs is how can we create and how can we realize opportunities, new opportunities for revenue generation and opportunities that bring impact. Our most nimble response and capacity to do that will be realized through continuing education. And I think we've demonstrated recently our capacity to do that quite readily in our ability to respond to the market demand as cannabis was legalizing. We were right in front of that and have created a suite of courses that lead to a certificate that have been quite lucrative for us and subsequently have contributed to the bottom line of the institution. So we need to keep our ear to the ground. We need to engage with industry more, and we need to understand how this institution can be more more and more readily responsive as we move through this transition.
The one thing I'll just add to round out the answer here, thank you, Annalise and Leslie, and this I think is just in terms of how we're thinking, and to your point about, what do we think in terms of the leadership, what can happen in certain departments. So I'd encourage you to think about what is possible, because I think I had a nice conversation the other day with a faculty member in the Bissett School talking about innovation and when innovation happens. So I think we do have a chance here to think innovatively, and more minds are better than just the few up here. So I would encourage you to think about that. And one thing I'm going to just put out there for you to think about is the system. You can think about your department, you can think about your faculty, you can think about Mount Royal, but one of the things that I think for me stood out in the McKinnon report were questions about the system and issues around system collaboration. And I think there are opportunities for system collaboration, and maybe some of those opportunities are entrepreneurial. Since arriving in the province, I've had the opportunity to meet the other 26 presidents of the post-secondary institutions, and in particular have chatted a few with some of the college presidents, great chats with Bow Valley College, their president, and I don't know that we know exactly what we might do, but I think that thinking broadly and having those kinds of conversations and really trying to leverage relationships in order to think about possibility is something I would strongly encourage you to think about. Who knows? Another question. I'm mindful of time. We probably have time for another one or two, depending on how complex they are. Yes, back there. I see a wave. Thank you.
I'm just back from a very epic experience where I actually got to walk on the Mackenzie River and ski on the Arctic Ocean. And the reputation of Mount Royal is now expanding within the Indigenous communities in the Yukon and Northwest Territories. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that on a very positive note. My question really has to do with much of what we've been talking about today is sort of inwards looking. I'm very concerned as a professor in a public institute that our 5 private religious universities were not cut. I'm very concerned that there's this, and I don't know if this is true or not, but it's my perception, that there seems to be a lack of cutting to charter and private schools, that there was this lack of cutting to the private religious universities here in Canada, or here in Alberta, sorry. What is happening at the presidential level? I mean, I realize everybody right now is scrambling to deal with the cuts that we just experienced, but is there some talk at the presidential level to bring forward responses to the UCP government to say that this is not right, these are the reasons why? I think about the question that Sheila brought up earlier with respect to the international students. No, the tuition is not the answer. Increasing the funds or increasing the money to expect for my concern is I don't think the government knows that. And I just see that message that they sent out of the budget cuts, that the impact is on the poor and on the lower income, it's not on the upper income, it's not on the big business. So my concern is it seems to me that they're deaf to that. And I was just wondering if at the level of the presidency, across all of the upper post-secondary institutes, if there's some conversation about how we can move forward to bring this message and to bring support and a sense of support to our public institutes.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to try to do that one justice as well. And essentially, the comment from one of our professors talking about her own recent experiences, inspired by recent nature activities, walking on rivers and other things I don't want to do. and the comment that that the reputation of Mount Royal University is increasing and is with Indigenous peoples. The concern being that we sometimes can be too inward-looking. Concerns that the 5 private universities were not cut, and comments about funding of charter schools, private schools, and overall a concern around the provincial budget and its impact on the poor versus on others. And the question particularly focusing on what's happening at the presidential level. So hopefully I've captured that. So I guess I would preface that by saying, well, maybe I am a politician. I don't see myself as a politician, but perhaps as a university president, I'm a small p politician. And to say to you that since arriving in the province, what I note is a reasonably good dialogue among the presidents of post-secondary institutions, which I think is good. And particularly for me as a new Albertan, I have an Alberta driver's license, but that's about as Albertan as I am, getting context from them has been very helpful to me. So yes, the presidents of the post-secondary institutions in Alberta are certainly seized of the matters, and I think that all of us, as many of you may have, read the McKinnon report in its entirety, not just the section on post-secondary education. The government has been very clear, as I understand it, again, this is not my political stance, this is my understanding, that commitments were made in terms of the preservation of funding to K-12 education and in health. Of course, the people in those jurisdictions view this with some nuance and very differently than the notion of preservation of funding. But what that has done, as I understand it, and I heard this from the minister himself, and the premier, I believe, that meant that when they're looking at the costs and trying to reduce costs, that meant that post-secondary education was a huge part of the public purse, and that was an area where that there would have to be some cutbacks. I can't really comment necessarily on the funding or the choices around the private institutions. I know what they would say. I think what they would point out is that their funding levels are much lower, but I think that's very different than the question and the analysis of the matter in terms of who gets public funding. Whether that's at the post-secondary level or at the K-12 level. So I think that's a bit of a minefield for me to walk into right now and say that it's something for you to think about in terms of how institutions around the province are funded. I do think, though, that it is important for us to recognize, today we're talking about Mount Royal, we're talking about the fact that we have had to cut some positions. And of course, all of you, there are other things that you're involved in. You have lives, you have children, you have parents, you have other services that you take advantage of. And of course, we're just one part of a larger economy, and certainly in terms of provincial funding. And so I think that it is important for us to keep an eye on those things and to figure out not to be totally inwardly thinking, and to consider what is happening in the province. My own analysis in terms of what I'm seeing and in terms of what's being considered in my own conversations with other leaders and with government is they seem to have a very good handle on what the costs are, what is being funded and what isn't being funded, and are making choices, and whether or not I or you or all of us collectively agree or disagree with those choices, I can't really say. I back it up, frankly, in my own mind. I arrived in the province 2 days before the provincial election, and what I saw was a strong mandate from Albertans for this government and their approach to fiscal austerity. And so as a university president, what's really important to me on behalf of Mount Royal University, and I think on behalf of the sector, is to work positively with government who have this mandate and to do our very best to make sure they have all the information that they can possibly have, to unpack the information that is used in reports like the McKinnon report, to tell our story, to tell the story of our student satisfaction, to tell the story of the impact that we have in our community, to try, to the best of our ability, make sure that they look on us favorably and see what we're trying to achieve here. I believe Mount Royal University is a good news story in the education of Albertans. And I think when we look at all of those statistics in the McKinnon report, we are right up there. We are right up there in terms of our outcomes, our costs, our retention rates, our graduation rates. Again, we have to do our very best to maintain or improve those, and I think that's the way in which we can probably make some progress. That's probably the way that we can appeal to private funders as well as government funders on how wonderful an opportunity we have to repurpose our library space, what that can do to potentially educate more people, and try to tell that story to the best of our ability. With that in mind, noting the time, I think we're at 11:05. We were scheduled for an hour, that's correct. Mercifully 1 hour, and again, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you. Certainly, I appreciate the comments you've made about transparency. We'll do our very best with that. Thank you to all of you for your notes. It means a lot to me in particular because I know that some of you are hurting, and yet you take the time to reach out and support your leadership. Very much appreciated. Thank you, and we'll speak to you more.